In the ruins of Europe's greatest war, silence buried more than the dead. Beneath the wreckage of treaties and propaganda, sealed files whispered of missions erased, convoys that never reached their ports, and operations that never appeared on a single military ledger. The victors wrote the headlines, but the archives, the real ones, tell another story. It is the story of missing transmissions, altered reports, and orders stamped with the words, "Top secret, destroy after reading." What was hidden was not forgotten, and what was forgotten was never meant to be found. Chapter 1, Operation Morning Star, the Siberian Convoy Files. In February 1943, a coded transmission left the Admiralty's North Atlantic Command at Scapa Flow. It bore a single designation, PQ-97, Operation Morning Star, a convoy route to Murmansk under direct coordination with Soviet naval intelligence. Officially, it was a resupply mission. 21 merchant ships carrying Lend-Lease material, including aircraft parts, medical units, and radio equipment. But the manifest recovered years later from a mislabeled archive at Q reveals something different. Beneath standard listings, a single entry was typed in German. Frachtstück 77, zu übergeben an NKVD. Item 77, to be handed to Soviet internal security. No Allied paperwork mentions its nature. No correspondence identifies its origin. Yet the convoy sailed and disappeared. The Northern Sea was an execution ground in 1943. Convoys to Murmansk suffered some of the highest casualty rates of the war. U-boats prowled below the ice, Luftwaffe bombers above. But PQ-97 was never attacked. Kriegsmarine logs for May and June of that year record no engagement in the sector north of Franz Josef Land. Even B-Dienst, the German naval code-breaking division, had no intercepts referring to the operation. It was as if PQ-97 never existed. The last wireless message, logged 0214 GMT on March 6, read, "Visibility poor, proceeding north under orders, stop." The call sign was authentic, the source confirmed. And then silence. When British records were reopened in 1978, a note appeared attached to the PQ-97 file. In faint typewritten ink, operation closed. Losses classified. Further inquiry restricted under Cabinet Directive 47 Alpha. The directive itself is missing, but Soviet archives, declassified after the fall of the USSR, revealed a parallel record, an NKVD transport manifest marked Sibirskaya Zvezda, or Siberian Star. The timing, route, and vessel count matched PQ-97. It seems the British and Soviet designations were two sides of the same. Operation.eyewitness accounts from Archangel tell of a train convoy arriving in late March 1943. The men unloading wore Royal Navy uniforms, but spoke English with unfamiliar accents, possibly Canadians or Americans. Locals were forbidden to approach. The cargo was moved under armed guard to a depot on the edge of the Kolmogorye district, where NKVD trucks took over. The train then returned empty. Weeks later, the depot was sealed, and the workers reassigned to distant logging camps. None of the foreign officers were seen again. Decades later, a former prisoner from a nearby gulag, identified only as Ivan P., gave testimony to a BBC researcher working on Arctic transport routes. He described foreigners with pale faces and blue uniforms, confined to a wooden barrack behind barbed wire, guarded by NKVD men in black coats. They arrived by train, were kept isolated for a week, and then, one night, disappeared. Trucks moved out toward the White Sea under cover of snowstorm. They said it was secret cargo for the motherland, Ivan recalled. But it was not ours. It smelled of oil and metal, not Russian. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, fragments of the KGB's predecessor archives surfaced through private collectors. Among them, a partial NKVD communication log from March 1943 referenced delivery of technological apparatus from the English, per Comrade Berrier's directive. The apparatus was to be transported to Site 12, coordinates redacted, for evaluation and replication. Site 12 is believed to correspond with the early testing grounds near Nyonoksa, later used for missile experiments. Western analysts speculated that Operation Morning Star was not about aid at all, but the transfer of advanced Allied radar or propulsion systems for Soviet study. Yet one line in the document unsettled historians. Apparatus originates from captured Axis project, not domestic manufacture. If that was true, PQ-97 may have carried not Allied technology but German. That would mean, even before the war's end, the Western Allies were quietly funneling elements of Nazi research to their Soviet partners, research perhaps too dangerous or politically volatile to appear in official records. The implication was clear. Beneath the alliance, there were deals. In 2003, a sonar survey by the Norwegian Polar Institute detected metallic debris beneath ice layers north of Novaya Zemlya. Among the fragments was a corroded ship's bell engraved SS, Brantford Bay, one of the PQ-97 vessels, listed as lost without trace. Samples indicated explosive damage inconsistent with torpedo impact, more akin to an internal detonation. The remains were classified non-recoverable by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Researchers attempting to revisit the site were denied permits for reasons of national security. British naval historian Dr. Alistair Mowbray, in a confidential letter to the Imperial War Museum in 2011, noted that 3 officers involved in PQ-97's planning, Captains Gerald Finch, Lieutenant CMDR Peter Holt, and Rear Admiral John Lawton, all resigned within 6 months of the convoy's disappearance. None gave public statements. Finch later died in a car accident near Inverness under suspicious circumstances. Holt emigrated to Canada and lived in seclusion. Lawton's personal diaries, seized after his death in 1952, remain sealed by the Ministry of Defense until 2073. What exactly was Frachtstück 77? Theories range from stolen German reactor components to an incomplete V-weapon prototype smuggled through Sweden. Another theory, based on fragments of correspondence between American OSS officer James Forrestal and Soviet attaché Ivan Serov, suggests the cargo contained experimental alloys from a crash site in Norway, linked to a Luftwaffe program for high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. A letter from Forrestal dated March 1, 1943, states cryptically, "The package is en route north. Ensure Stalin's men understand the conditions. No duplicates, no traces." By all appearances, PQ-97 was never meant to return. Its mission ended not in battle but in silence, absorbed by the polar waste and bureaucratic denial. Yet in 2015, Norwegian fishermen reported retrieving a wooden crate stenciled with the faded letters PQ-97B. Inside were fragments of a copper coil and a metal plate stamped AEG Kriegsfertigungsstempel, war production marking from a German electronics firm. The artifacts were confiscated by Russian authorities within 48 hours. In the years since, the story of Operation Morningstar has become a footnote in the shadow world of wartime intelligence, a whisper of collusion and concealment. Every mention of PQ-97 in naval archives is followed by the same red mark: record incomplete. Every request for declassification is denied. The convoy's name, Morningstar, evokes light, yet its legacy remains buried in the Arctic dark. Somewhere beneath the ice, the remains of 21 ships lie encased in silence, a fleet erased from history. Whether they carried weapons, technology, or the ghosts of an uneasy alliance, no one can say. But one truth endures. In the north, nothing disappears without reason, and what sank with PQ-97 was not just steel and cargo, but a secret too dangerous to surface. Chapter 2. The Hürtgen Protocol. Silence beneath the pines. The Hürtgen forest should have been just another stretch of battlefield. Located along the Belgian-German border, it was a cold, tangled maze of fir trees, mud and blood, a place where visibility fell to meters and men vanished into the mist. Between September 1944 and February 1945, over 30,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded there. Officially, the campaign was meant to breach the Siegfried Line, but as reports trickled in from the surviving units of the 28th Infantry Division, something didn't add up. The orders changed mid-battle, objectives blurred, and whole companies were redirected into unmarked grid zones, locations later erased from military maps. Buried in the after-action report stamped Protocol 19A was a single phrase: anomalous ordnance recovery, hold perimeter, no civilian entry. It began with a shell crater. On November 24, 1944, engineers of the 112th Infantry Regiment discovered a collapsed bunker deep within Sector C4. Beneath the rubble lay something metallic, smooth and entirely foreign to the standard German defences of the region. The object was described in field notes as half-sphere construction, seamless, emitting residual heat despite ambient sub-zero conditions. An immediate request for Ordnance Technical Intelligence, OTI, evaluation was made, but the reply bypassed command and came directly from Chef Headquarters. Secure site, awaits special unit retrieval. Within 48 hours, unmarked personnel in grey fatigues arrived, their vehicles bearing no division insignia. Local command was instructed to pull back 1 kilometre. The 112th radio operators were ordered to maintain silence. By the end of the week, the entire forest section was cordoned off with barbed wire, labelled simply as Zone 19. All surviving field sketches and photographic plates from the site were collected and destroyed. The few that survived were retrieved decades later by German forestry workers. Blurred images of twisted metal half buried in frozen mud, its curvature too precise, its surface too unblemished to be a wrecked bunker. In an official memorandum dated December 3, 1944, Major General Norman Cotter wrote to the War Department, "Our men are being asked to fight ghosts and dig up something no one will explain. The forest itself feels under surveillance." After the war, most veterans of the 28th Infantry refused to discuss Hürtgen. Those who did recalled night operations in which the air crackled, compasses spun erratically, and their hair stood on end. Corporal Thomas Gleason, whose debriefing was partially released in 1957, described hearing low-frequency pulses like an engine turning under the earth. When he and his squad investigated, they found freshly disturbed soil and 2 German corpses, their faces burned without visible fire damage. Within hours of the report, Gleason was reassigned to the Ardennes front. His file was later sealed under the same notation, Protocol 19A. In 1952, NATO established the Allied Weapons Research Committee in Paris. Among its early projects was a review of unexplained ordnance recoveries during European operations. 1. Classified annex referenced Hürtgenwald. Anomaly, cross-referencing US Army records with captured German technical reports. Buried in a footnote was mention of Wehrmacht Versuchsanlage Thede, Experimental Site 13, allegedly operated by the Heereswaffenamt, Army Ordnance Office. Located somewhere beneath the forest, it was dedicated to energetic field devices. The term never appeared in any known German weapons documentation. However, a surviving notebook belonging to SS Obersturmbannführer Erich Naumann mentioned Projekt Glühwürmchen, Firefly Project, testing non-explosive field discharges for armour disruption. It was discontinued in early 1945 after catastrophic containment failure. In the late 1970s, the Bundeswehr conducted a survey of the forest to clear old mines. They discovered sealed concrete access shafts filled with resin and sand, their interiors melted smooth. The Army's Engineering Corps noted elevated radiation levels, but dismissed them as natural radon. Local residents, however, reported military trucks operating at night, hauling away crates marked US property, restricted. A German journalist, Lutz Kahner, attempted to document the activity. His film was confiscated by military police, and he later died in a car accident outside Aachen. His last article draft contained 3 words scrawled across the margin, "Not German technology, documents." Declassified under FOIA in 1998, revealed that the CIA requested access to Hürtgen Forest, containment files, from NATO's Central Archive in 1954. The documents were labelled under Shape Directive 74B, identical to the classification used for nuclear testing research. The CIA's request was denied by the Department of Defense with a note. Records transferred to Camp Dietrich, Biological Division. Why biological? No further details exist, but scientists from Fort Detrick were known to handle radiological and energy exposure cases. A surviving witness, Lieutenant Samuel Red Barker, gave a recorded interview to the Library of Congress Veterans Project in 2002. His voice trembled when he spoke of the nights in Hürtgen. "We dug near those bunkers and the ground was warm," he said. "Not just warm, humming like a generator under your boots. Then the snow around it would melt in circles. They told us it was just chemical waste from German labs. But you don't get static shocks from dirt. We saw one of the engineers collapse when his spade hit metal. They took him away wrapped in canvas, said he was suffering from frostbite. He wasn't cold. He was glowing red." By 1961, the Hürtgen sector was sealed again, this time under NATO authority. Officially, it was a reforestation project. In reality, aerial photos reveal excavation sites in the same coordinates noted by the 28th Infantry Division in 1944. The photographs were marked restricted terrain monitoring. No soil records were released. Some analysts suggest the remains of Site 13 were recovered during this period and transported to the United States for study, perhaps even forming the technical seed for later energy and propulsion research. Others claim the materials were buried deeper, entombed in concrete, the forest left to grow over the scars. The locals still speak of the forest that hums. Woodcutters avoid certain sectors where their chainsaws jam inexplicably. Hunters report compass errors and sudden radio interference. A 1987 geological survey recorded temperature anomalies as high as 40 degrees Celsius in isolated pockets beneath the forest floor, unexplained yet persistently ignored. The Hürtgen forest remains officially off limits for excavation beyond 1 meter depth due to unexploded ordnance risk. When NATO declassified parts of its archive in 2015, researchers found an unsigned memorandum referencing Operation Silence, German theatre residual assets. It included a single line: Zone 19, residual activity ongoing, periodic containment verified. The date was December 1974. Nearly 30 years after the war ended, someone was still monitoring whatever lay beneath the pines. To this day, no official record defines Protocol 19A. It appears in no known Allied operational manuals. Yet its phrasing, anomalous ordnance recovery, reoccurs in several other files concerning sealed wartime sites in Norway, Poland, and southern France. The implication is unmistakable. Hürtgen was not an isolated discovery. It was one node in a larger pattern, an unspoken project that transcended national borders and continued long after 1945. When the wind moves through the Hürtgen trees, the branches creak like metal under strain. Beneath them, the soil is laced with fragments of wire and iron, remnants of bunkers that once held secrets now claimed by moss and time. The war ended, but the hum remains. And every few years, a faint vibration is detected on seismic instruments, deep under the forest floor, rhythmic, steady, mechanical. Whatever the Allies sealed there in 1945, it still moves. Chapter 3: Echoes of Odessa, the Vanishing of U-977. In May 1945, as Berlin burned and the Reich collapsed into ash, one U-boat slipped quietly from the naval base at Kristiansand, Norway. Its hull number was U-977, a Type 7C submarine commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Schäfer. The official record states that she fled Germany after the surrender, sailing more than 10,000 nautical miles to Argentina before turning herself in. But the surviving Kriegsmarine logbooks tell a different story. Between May 7 and August 17, 71 days, the submarine disappeared from all Allied tracking. No Enigma decrypts, no sonar pings, no surface sightings. It was as if U-977 had submerged beneath history itself. The voyage, according to Schäfer's post-war testimony, was a desperate attempt to reach freedom. Yet discrepancies in his report immediately raised suspicion. His claimed route, around the Cape Verde Islands to the South Atlantic, would have required fuel reserves far beyond the submarine's capacity. Engineers who examined U-977 upon surrender found her diesel engines unusually modified, the fuel injectors replaced with experimental components marked AEG Versuchsmuster, meaning prototype. Allied intelligence filed the discovery under Project Vulcan. That term, found in captured Abwehr archives, referred to experimental propulsion systems linked to high-energy research conducted in the last months of the war at Kiel and Peenemünde. The question arose, had U-977 been more than a fleeing vessel? When the submarine reached Mar del Plata on August 17, 1945, Argentine naval officials noted an unusually nervous crew and a sealed compartment aft of the control room welded shut from the inside. Schäfer refused to open it, claiming it held contaminated batteries. The Americans insisted on cutting it open. Inside, they found empty storage racks, lead shielding, and a blackened control panel bearing radiation warning symbols uncommon in 1945. The discovery was suppressed under the authority of the US naval mission to Argentina. Only one photograph survives, a grainy image of a rectangular frame lined with burnt copper coils, later labeled in handwriting, Power Modulator, Origin, U-977. For decades, Argentina maintained silence about the U-boat's arrival, But in 1992, declassified fragments from the Argentine Navy's Archivo Azul revealed a shadow operation titled Recepción Sur. It described cargo transfers conducted offshore, 30 July 1945, latitude 46°, near Golfo San Jorge. Witnesses reported 2 unmarked vessels rendezvousing with a surfaced submarine under fog cover. Crates were hoisted, marked with the eagle and swastika insignia and stenciled letters VK. The same file noted an order from President Juan Perón's office to provide temporary asylum for German personnel with technical credentials, beneficial to national interests. Within weeks, several unidentified engineers arrived in Buenos Aires under false identities, reportedly attached to the nascent Argentine Aeronautical Research Institute. American OSS intercepts confirm the operation's timing. Telegram SR 4334, transmitted from Montevideo Station to Washington on August 2, 1945, reads, unconfirmed reports of Axis vessel activity off Patagonian coast stop possible exfiltration of technical cargo. Stop designation Vulcan appears in ciphered traffic. The cable was filed under Odessa operations, a codename used to track post-war Nazi flight networks. The OSS believed U-977 carried either personnel or technology related to nuclear or electromagnetic propulsion research, but the file was closed abruptly in 1948 with the note, subject integrated via Operation Safe Haven. Further pursuit unnecessary. In 1952, during an interview with the German weekly Der Stern, Schäfer denied transporting anyone of importance. Yet naval intelligence analyst Commander Philip Wainwright, who debriefed the crew, recalled something different. They were drilled to consistency, he wrote. Every man told the same story word for word, not one variance. That is not memory, that is training. When questioned about the cargo transfers, Schäfer smiled and said only, there are things better left at the bottom. What lay at that bottom may never surface. In 1974, Argentine divers exploring wrecks near Puerto Deseado reported locating a metallic structure buried beneath sediment. Cylindrical, roughly 10 meters in length, bearing the remnants of a German naval insignia. Before a recovery could be organized, the Navy intervened, sealing off the area as a hydrographic research zone. The divers were interrogated and released under oath to remain silent. That same year, an internal Argentine memo was issued. Continued stability of South Atlantic, secured by discretion regarding former German assets. American interest revived briefly during the Cold War. In 1967, the CIA launched Project Aegir, focused on tracking wartime technology transfers to South America. One report referenced U-9737 event correlated with electromagnetic drive experiment number 4, possibly an early investigation into propulsion research suppressed during the war. A summary to the Director of Naval Research noted, if accurate, U-977 may represent a lost intermediary between conventional and advanced maritime systems, potentially prefiguring post-war Soviet interest in field-based propulsion. The final page of the report was blacked out entirely. Locals along the Patagonian coast still tell stories of lights moving beneath the waves, of abandoned concrete bunkers inland where German voices were heard for years after the war. An Argentine fisherman interviewed in 1983 recalled finding metal debris with German markings tangled in his nets near San Matias Gulf. When he turned them over to authorities, men claiming to be from the embassy retrieved the material and warned him not to discuss it. His name was not recorded. His trawler sank the following winter under unexplained circumstances. The most disturbing evidence, however, surfaced from an unexpected source, Soviet intelligence. In 1991, following the dissolution of the USSR, KGB documents were released under glasnost, including a 1945 GRU intercept describing German vessel transporting unknown apparatus to South Atlantic. Destination Argentine military contact via neutral intermediaries. The note identified the vessel by number 977. The GRU's final assessment. Possible exfiltration of energy device. Codename Vulcan. If true, this would mean 3 of the world's major powers, the US, the USSR, and Argentina, all knew of U-977's secret mission but buried their findings. The geopolitical consequences of admitting that Germany's wartime research may have survived intact, relocated, and perhaps replicated were too volatile. Better to let the submarine's tale drift into rumor, conspiracy, and saltwater myth. Today, U-977 rests in a naval museum in Buenos Aires, stripped and silent. Tourists walk its narrow corridors, unaware that its interior has been rebuilt. The original aft compartment, the welded section, was removed before the exhibit opened in 1957. The replacement plate bears no markings. The curator's guidebook claims it was damaged by pressure depth, though internal reports filed at the time contradict that. The last trace of the original hull section appeared in a 1961 shipment manifest to the United States, destination Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville. The item description: scrap steel, sample for metallurgical testing. No further reference exists. The sea keeps its secrets, but the record remains suggestive. A U-boat departs after surrender. It sails beyond known endurance, makes contact off a remote coast, and delivers something valuable enough to erase. And in the silence between sonar pings, between surrender and surrender again, the echo of Odessa lingers, the network that never died, the war that never quite ended, and the submarine that carried its last breath into the deep. Chapter 4. Paperclip. Shadows. The Huntsville Disappearances. When the last bombs fell and the ink of surrender dried, the victors turned not to peace, but to procurement. Between 1945 and 1952, under the cloak of Operation Paperclip, over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and medical specialists were quietly relocated to the United States. Their expertise in rocketry, aeronautics, chemistry became the lifeblood of the early Cold War. Yet buried deep within the Pentagon's logistical records is a list that does not appear on any official transfer roster. 12 names, all designated Project Vireo Group C. The men existed only in fragments. Transport requests without arrivals, security clearances without homes, contracts without signatures. Their destination was never Redstone Arsenal or Fort Bliss, but somewhere deeper, off the record, beneath the soil of Huntsville, Alabama. The first clue comes from a requisition order dated June 19, 1946, issued by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, marked Confidential, Special Facilities Construction. The order requests the allocation of 50 acres of land outside Huntsville under the name Camp Vireo. Officially, it was a materials testing site for Army engineering, but correspondence between Colonel Holbrook Baines of the Ordnance Department and Dr. Kurt de Boos, the former V-2 launch director from Peenemünde, suggests otherwise. In a letter now housed at the National Archives, Baines wrote, "Containment specifications confirmed. Personnel from Group C will oversee installation. No publicity under Paperclip designation. This falls under Operation Cloverleaf." That operation, according to declassified fragments, dealt with energy systems derived from enemy research. Local records show that construction began in early 1947. Civilian contractors were replaced halfway through by Army personnel with no listed unit affiliation. Residents nearby reported night convoys arriving from Redstone Arsenal, transporting sealed metal containers marked with radiation hazard symbols, markings that did not officially exist until the Atomic Energy Act of 1946. One truck overturned on Route 72 after a brake failure. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene. His uniform bore no insignia and the vehicle was removed before sunrise. A local deputy who responded to the crash, Harold McCaskill, later wrote in his personal diary, "They said not to look inside. I caught a glimpse anyway. There was light, faint blue coming from inside the crate." By autumn, Camp Vireo vanished from county property maps. Its coordinates were absorbed into an expanded Redstone Arsenal boundary. No public record of the transfer exists. Yet in the following years, a string of disappearances haunted the Huntsville area. Between 1948 and 1951, 5 German émigré scientists associated with the Paperclip program were reported missing. Official explanations ranged from reassignment to voluntary return to Germany. Their passports, however, were never logged by the State Department. Among them was Dr. Erich Malten, an expert in plasma dynamics who had worked at Peenemunde's wind tunnels. His wife filed a missing persons report in 1949, stating that he left for a temporary consultation at Camp Vireo and never returned. The investigation was closed after a phone call from Washington instructed local authorities to defer to federal jurisdiction. In 1952, An anonymous letter reached the Huntsville Times. Written in shaky German English, it read, "They are building the sun under the ground. We work with light that does not burn. It eats air and sound. 12 are gone. I will be next." The letter was signed only H. Weiss. A few months later, a man by that name was found drowned in the Tennessee River. No autopsy was performed. Within weeks, all reference to Camp Vireo disappeared from Army internal bulletins. What remained were coded communications between the Department of Defense and the newly formed CIA, referencing continuation of Vireo research, non-nuclear propulsion testing Phase 2. The most striking confirmation came years later, during the Freedom of Information releases of the 1990s. A partially declassified memorandum from 1954, addressed to the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, reads, "Subject: Integration of Project Vireo under Advanced Propulsion Studies, Huntsville Sector. Personnel accounted for, assets transferred to Division P. Division P has never been identified in any public record." The memo ends with a chilling line: "Residual effects detected, isolation protocols maintained." Rumors circulated among Redstone workers of underground chambers that vibrated at odd frequencies, of animals found dead near drainage culverts with no visible wounds, and of technicians who vanished after complaining of headaches and metallic taste in their mouths. One engineer, speaking anonymously in the 1970s, claimed that Vireo wasn't a lab, it was a containment site. They weren't developing something, they were keeping something from spreading. His account was dismissed as paranoia, but later, satellite imaging revealed heat signatures beneath a wooded area southeast of Redstone, consistent with subterranean structures. In 1963, following the assassination of President Kennedy, a Senate subcommittee reviewing classified research budgets stumbled upon a discrepancy labeled Project V. When auditors attempted to trace the funding stream, they were informed that the line item pertained to national security facilities, legacy infrastructure inactive. The inquiry was closed. However, a retired Army procurement officer later testified privately that Project V stood for Vireo, and that funds continued through the 1980s. He recalled the phrase containment maintenance being used in contract renewals long after the site was supposedly abandoned. The last verifiable mention of Camp Vireo appears in a declassified 1969 Defense Intelligence Agency report analyzing Soviet interest in non-conventional propulsion energy. One paragraph, later redacted, referenced US continuity research at Huntsville consistent with Project Vulcan and Project Vireo principles. Vulcan, Fangs, the same codename linked to U-977 appeared again, tying the Nazi submarine's mysterious cargo to the hidden laboratory beneath Alabama soil. Whatever was smuggled across the Atlantic in 1945 may have resurfaced in the American South, refined and repurposed under Paperclip's shadow. Today, no trace of Camp Vireo exists above ground. The area, fenced and patrolled, is labelled Environmental Restoration Zone 47. Signs warn of chemical contamination, but locals speak of a faint hum that rises from the earth on humid nights. Old-timers call it the German heartbeat. Every few years, a new set of survey markers appear, then vanish. Workers from Redstone avoid discussing the subject. Official tours skirt the area completely. What happened to the 12 missing men? Their families were compensated quietly through the Department of Defense, classified as accidental deaths during service. Their death certificates, printed on military letterhead, list identical causes: internal trauma due to containment exposure. No explanation, no autopsy, no graves. Just 12 names erased, absorbed into a project whose name was never meant to surface. Huntsville grew around them, rockets pierced the sky, and history celebrated the genius imported from Germany. Yet somewhere beneath the red clay and pine roots, sealed chambers still hum with the residue of an experiment born in war and buried in peace. The shadows of Paperclip did not fade. They deepened, merging with the soil, marking a place where science, secrecy, and guilt fused into one unending silence. Chapter 5: The Prague Signal. Ghost Transmission 74B. At precisely 22:17 local time on April 9th, 1949, a faint radio transmission emerged from the static blanketing post-war Europe. Its signal, detected simultaneously by monitoring stations in Berlin, Zurich, and London, originated somewhere near Prague. It lasted 7 seconds, just long enough for technicians at the British Foreign Office's listening post Alpha to log its existence before it vanished into the ether. The frequency was 5.243 MHz, an old Wehrmacht broadcast band that had been inactive since 1945. Yet the encryption pattern embedded in the transmission was neither German nor Soviet. According to MI6 analysts, it contained fragments of an Allied cipher system, a code abandoned after the fall of Berlin. This anomaly would come to be known as Ghost Transmission 74B. The political climate of Czechoslovakia in 1949 was fraught with paranoia. The communist regime, newly consolidated under Soviet influence, had begun purging suspected Western sympathizers from its intelligence apparatus. Amidst this tension, a small section of the Czechoslovak Signal Corps, stationed at the ruined Wehrmacht relay tower outside the village of Nové Dvory, was tasked with monitoring foreign radio traffic. Their nightly logs show consistent Soviet naval chatter, occasional British Morse tests, and nothing unusual until April 9th. Then, a spike in frequency strength followed by a brief coded burst, one that none of their Soviet handlers could decode. Within 48 hours, the entire listening post was reassigned, the tower was demolished, and the incident was labelled malfunction due to atmospheric interference. In 1953, a defecting STB officer, Captain Rudolf Havelka, described the event during debriefings in Vienna. His testimony, classified by both British and American intelligence, asserted that a foreign element within Czechoslovakia's post-war command structure had attempted to contact Allied intelligence using pre-1945 encryption keys. He claimed that the source of the transmission was not a person, but a machine, an automated relay configured before the end of the war. The signal, he said, originated from the old German network beneath Prague Castle, a subterranean communications system constructed by the Reich Security Main Office in 1944 to maintain encrypted contact with occupied territories. If Havelka was correct, 74B was not an accident. It was a delayed echo from a war that refused to die. By 1957, NATO's cryptologic division had decrypted fragments of the captured signal. The results were unsettling. The message contained 4 words in alternating German and English. Bergmann, aktiviert, warten, Schwarzpunkt. Translated loosely, Bergmann activated, await black point. None of these terms appeared in any Allied or Axis operational lexicon. However, a classified OSS archive from late 1944 references Operation Bergmann, a covert Anglo-American mission to extract specific SS research personnel from occupied Prague before the Soviet advance. The operation reportedly failed and all participating agents were declared missing. Schwarzpunkt, or black point, does not appear in any known record, but marginal notes from an OSS debrief in May 1945 describe it as a fail-safe condition for incomplete transmissions. Some cryptographers began to suspect that 74B was a decades-delayed activation, an automatic signal triggered by an internal mechanism long buried underground. Further investigation only deepened the mystery. In 1961, during a period of heightened Cold War tension, a Czechoslovak military engineering team unearthed fragments of telecommunications cabling during renovations near the Vltava River embankment. The conduits were sheathed in alloy tubing consistent with late-war German military design, but carried no manufacturer markings. Electrical testing revealed residual current despite the cables being unconnected to any power grid. The site was immediately classified by the Soviet KGB as a sensitive defense zone, and all documentation was transferred to Moscow. The Prague Technical University professors who initially examined the find were detained for questioning and subsequently reassigned to labor facilities outside Brno. None returned to academia. In 1979, the Central Intelligence Agency reopened the 74B case after an anomalous event during a NATO communications exercise. A shortwave station in Italy intercepted a signal on the same frequency, identical encryption structure, same 7-second burst. The origin, triangulated by airborne reconnaissance, traced once again to Prague. By that point, the Soviet Union had fortified every known transmission site in Czechoslovakia, and the Prague signal was officially dismissed as residual frequency interference. Yet an internal NSA memorandum dated January 1980 concludes otherwise. Transmission consistent with legacy Axis hardware. Persistence across 3 decades suggests autonomous origin. Source remains unidentified. Independent Czech researchers, following the Velvet Revolution of 1989, gained limited access to the state security archives. Among the seized documents was an inventory list for a Bergman installation, Substructure 11, located beneath the ruins of the former Reich Protectorate's communications ministry. The description matched wartime blueprints of a hardened relay bunker, capable of broadcasting encrypted signals without human input, powered by thermal generators designed to run indefinitely. The bunker's entrance, sealed in 1950 under Soviet supervision, was later incorporated into the Prague Metro's maintenance system. A maintenance worker interviewed in 1990 described hearing a mechanical pulse, like clockwork, every few minutes emanating from the sealed shaft. No verified exploration of the site has occurred since. Attempts by journalists and historians to access the area were blocked by the Czech Ministry of Defense, which cited safety concerns related to structural instability and residual radiation. However, acoustic sensors installed by urban explorers in 2001 detected periodic electromagnetic activity corresponding exactly to the old transmission frequency. Though weaker, the pulse recurred every April, the anniversary of the original 74B signal. The implications remain unresolved. Was the transmission a wartime contingency left running unattended, or was it a deliberate post-war communication between elements of a defeated network? The reappearance of Allied cipher fragments suggests that someone, or something, retained operational knowledge of Allied systems decades after they were decommissioned. More disturbingly, 74B's persistence implies the continued existence of autonomous machinery designed to broadcast on command, perhaps awaiting a signal that has never come. Today, the Prague signal remains one of the most obscure anomalies of the Cold War archives. Its frequency is monitored annually by amateur radio historians, though the official NATO intercept stations have ceased active observation. Each year, on or near April 9th, the frequency briefly flickers to life, 7 seconds of static punctuated by faint tonal patterns no human agency claims responsibility for. Whether a malfunction, a ghost of long-dead communications infrastructure, or the heartbeat of an intelligence mechanism forgotten by time, the Prague signal continues to whisper across the decades, carrying with it the last coded breath of a vanished war. For half a century, the archives stayed sealed and the questions unanswered. Convoys lost to frozen seas, bunkers humming beneath forests, submarines fleeing into myth, laboratories that erased their own creators, and signals that refused to die. Every document declassified only revealed another redaction, another missing page, another name struck through in black ink. The wars ended on paper, but not in practice. Their echoes threaded through radio static, through soil and steel, through the minds of those who remembered too much. Somewhere, the circuits still hum, the files still wait, and the silence between them is heavy with the sound of unfinished history.